Gail Lindsay Mariner. She graduated from Harvard Divinity School, where she won the Billings Prize for Preaching in 1995. She has served congregations in Massachusetts and Texas and is currently consulting minister to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Duluth, Minnesota. Please welcome Gail.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to start with a story, because I'm not sure I know how to do a sermon without a story first. And this is a story from a book called Peace Tales. And the story is titled Slops. It's about an old couple who live in a tiny house with a garden outside and a wall around the garden about 7 steps from the front door. And every day they go out in the garden and they gather their peppers and their potatoes and their onions, and they take them inside and they make themselves supper. And they peel those onions and they peel those potatoes and they throw the slops into the bucket. And they roast and seed those peppers and they put the seeds and the skins in the bucket and they make themselves supper. And grateful for what they have, they sit down and they enjoy their meal, and at the end of the meal, they go ahead and they clean up and they wash the dishes and they put that dishwater right down there in the slop bucket. And one of them picks up the bucket and walks out the front door and takes 7 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to the wall at the edge of the garden and takes the bucket and dumps it over. Every day for the 50 or 60 or 70 years that they've been living there. Until one day, they pick their harvest, they eat their meal, they do their dishes, and they take all those slops and they carry them to the edge of the wall and they dump it over, and a wee voice says, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't do that." But there's no one there. Back into the house, kind of wondering what it was that was going on, and maybe there was a potato or a pepper that wasn't quite right in that last batch. But the next day again, they gather their harvest, they make their meal, they peel and they cut and they put everything in the bucket and they carry it to the wall. They get to the wall and nothing's there. Dump the bucket. And again that little voice comes, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't do that. I wish you would stop pouring your slops down my chimney." And this time there's someone standing there, a wee little fella about yay tall. "Excuse me, were you talking to me?" And the wee little fella says, "Yes, I was." "Well, what are you complaining about?" "Well, you've been dumping your slops over that wall down my chimney for years now, and I wish you'd stop." "But I don't see anything." And when he turned around, the wee little man was gone. Well, you can imagine the next evening after dinner was over, there was quite a bit of apprehension as the person carrying the bucket of slops approached the wall and looked over, dumped the slops, and here comes the voice again. "Oh, I've told you once. I've told you 3 times. I wish you'd quit dumping your slops down my chimney. But I don't see anything out there. There's just weeds and stones." "Ah, so now you're willing to see with my eyes, is it? All right, well, take your great big old foot and put it on top of mine, and then look over the wall." "I've been pouring my slops down your chimney." Because this time, when he looked over the wall, there was not just one wee little cottage, but an entire village of little cottages. And in the one just on the other side of the wall, oh my God, there were potato peelings draped over the chimney, and there were carrot peelings on the shutters, and dirty dishwasher was pouring out of the front door, and there was a wee little person with a mop, just mopping away and shaking a fist. I've been pouring my slops down your chimney. I've been pouring my slops down their chimneys. The person went inside and spoke to his partner, and he said, there's a whole village outside our wall, and I've been pouring the slops down the chimneys for 50, 60 years now, and I never knew they were there. What are we going to do? I'm too old to carry the slops all the way around the house to the back wall. Besides, maybe there's somebody living there too. What are we going to do? Well, you know, I've put some money by, said the partner. I think we've got enough to cut a whole new door in the other side there, whichever other side doesn't have a village on the other side of the wall, and then you can go out that door to dump the slops every day. They walked all the way around, peeking carefully to make sure there was no one living anywhere, and when they found an empty spot, that's where they cut the door. Carpenter came the next day, the door was cut, hinges, new handle, and the old door was boarded up so no one would ever be tempted to dump slops over the wall again. That night, the old couple, smiling to themselves, peeled their potatoes, diced up their onions, seeded their peppers, made their dinner, enjoyed it with a clear conscience, and swept all the leavings into the slop bucket. And then as the meal finished, they both went to that new door, and they picked up that bucket between them, and they carried it to the wall, and they dumped it over, and there was nothing. Happy with themselves, they walked back into their house, and as they closed the door, a wee silver coin rolled across the threshold, the gift from one good neighbor to another. And it happened every time they closed the door for the rest of their lives. I've been pouring my slops down your chimney. The amazed recognition in the old one's voice is my favorite line in the entire story. I've been pouring my slops down your chimney. In life, as in story, it's rare enough for us to hear from someone else that our comfort is leading to their discomfort. No matter how many times they tell us or try to tell us, we often have to see for ourselves the actual consequences of our choices and our actions. And it's only then that we ask ourselves why we've been pouring slops down one another's chimneys in the first place. You see, the old couple in the story don't set out to inconvenience anyone. They're simply minding their own business and taking care of their lives with a minimum of fuss and bother. They are, in fact, completely unaware of the fact that they have neighbors. Now, of course, these aren't neighbors like us, neighbors immediately recognized as such. In the story, the neighbors are wee folk whose households and economies are invisible to the old folks, even when they're told where to look. In fact, without special assistance, the old man can't see either the little person's village or the mess that his own slops have made. In a similar way, it's been common practice in our Western culture not to see the homes and the lifeways of the poor, of people of color, of First Nations peoples, of the native plant and animal ecologies, for that matter. And that not seeing frees us to blithely dump our slops over the wall and into the weeds. As a culture, our focus has often been on ourselves and our own convenience, and we've demonstrated an amazing inability even to see certain others. Why? Why? Well, in the opening pages of his book, Deep Economy, Bill McKibben writes, for most of human history, the two birds, more and better, have roosted on the same branch. You could toss one stone and hit them both. More food, more shelter, more stuff, more mobility. These, without doubt, made life better for millions of people. And since more is a whole lot easier to quantify than better, and since more initially leads to better, as in better health and better standard of living, governments and cultures began to focus on making sure that everyone had more. They don't like my saying that, I guess. All right? And that's how it's been done for years and years. Now, one of the side effects of a focus on more is that more for some often means less for others. And if the others are invisible, well, that's fewer folks with whom we have to share, right? But McKibben tells us that in our time, that bird better no longer roosts on the same branch as more. All over the world, it seems that at the point where one has about $10,000 a year to spend on basic needs, that's all, about 10,000, then better moves her nest to another tree. It isn't news for anyone here, I know, that after basic needs are met, food and clothing and housing and education and healthcare, happiness after that point is far more correlated with intangibles than it is with any more stuff. We are happier when we have deeper connections with one another, stronger relationships, more vibrant commons, a cleaner environment, more culture, more meaning. It turns out that in our individualistic pursuit of more money, more stuff, more convenience, we end up consuming a lot of the time and energy that could actually lead us towards better. And we create a whole lot of slops in the process. I know you all know about peak oil, that time when our fossil fuel consumption will peak and our oil reserves, the fossilized sunlight of millions of years, will be half depleted. Well, I'm waiting for another peak. I'm waiting for the moment of peak stuff. The time when all of our throwaway material cultural goods begin to reverse themselves. The moment we cease seeing those slops that we toss over the wall as waste and begin to see them as resources, to be composted or fed to the chickens. I look forward to the time when we're going to stop buying things to use and then throw away, and instead start investing our time and creativity and energy in creating durable objects, healthier ecologies, and stronger, more resilient communities and relationships. And what we need to do that is a perceptual shift, a shift in how we view the world, because changing how we see things often changes how we act. Now, when an artist wants to critique a composition that's grown too familiar, he or she will often look at a piece of art in a mirror or turn it upside down, shifting our focus from a world where more is the goal to a world where better is the goal is another way to shift focus. And reading our UU principles from number 7 to number 1 accomplishes much the same thing. On one level, nothing changes. All the same principles are right there. And yet, something is different when we affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part first, and leave celebrating the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, there's an implied parenthetical comment there, especially me, for the end. Now, I'm intrigued by the reversal, in part because I think we often get stuck in that first principle. In our voluntary associations as Unitarian Universalists, we come and go according to whether we feel our inherent worth and dignity, our perspective and opinion have been accorded their full due. But friends, just as the life that you are living here and now is your best or only chance for spiritual practice and self-realization, here in Albuquerque, this congregation, this group of Unitarian Universalists gathered in this sanctuary, is the closest community you have in which to explore your Unitarian Universalist values and practice living them. This is it. And I suspect, although I haven't got a smattering of proof, I suspect that if we were, as an association or even as small groups of communities, to begin reading and living our principles, beginning with the communal disciplines at the ending and ending with the more personal ones we currently put at the beginning, we will find ourselves in the midst of a transformation. I suspect that by focusing at least as much on the intangibles that come with respecting the interdependent web of existence as we do on the inherent worth and dignity of me, we will shift our emphasis from more to better without even knowing that that is what we are doing. Not more money and more people and more programming, but better communication, deeper ritual, stronger connections, and greater positive impact on the world beyond our walls. I suspect we will find ourselves focused on satisfying our communally held needs for meaning and culture and relationship. When we turn those principles upside down, we're called back again to that old slogan, the one that matched the music we heard earlier this morning. Think globally and act locally. We are reminded that before we assume that we get all the goodies, before we dump our slops, we need to check to see who lives on the other side of that garden wall. We're relational creatures, we human beings, and like it or not, we're always embedded, usually in multiple communities. And it's good because that means when we tend our communities, we support our own well-being as well. Creating stronger relationships and a vibrant commons gives all of us and each of us a better quality of life. Tend the better in the community, tend the commons, and we will arrive at better for every individual. I want to invite you to recall that our values as Unitarian Universalists were initially articulated during the Enlightenment and at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Even the wealthiest of most of our Unitarian Universalist forebears were materially quite poor. To walk through Thoreau's cottage or Emerson's home or the Alcott House when you visit New England is to be reminded that though they were intellectually and spiritually and relationally wealthy, our religious forebears were materially very poor in comparison to our standards. In that time, they took their highly interconnected, carefully choreographed community context completely for granted. And their emphasis on the worth and dignity of the individual was a corrective in the Enlightenment to both the privileging of some classes of human beings over others and the rising impulse to devalue all of humankind as cogs in an economic machine. What they took for granted in the interdependent web of relationships that they had with each other in the places that they live, we have almost lost. In our time, we need a different corrective. Now, I'm persuaded, as I look around our communities and the places that I've lived, that much of the harm that we do to ourselves and to others falls into the category of unintended side effects, slops dumped over the wall because we didn't realize anybody else was there. Our forebears never dreamed that honoring the inherent worth and dignity of every person would result in something like the hyper-individualism and disconnection that are so pervasive in our current culture. It never occurred to them that human agency could create global warming or decimate local food sheds or destroy the relational fabric of our communities. It never occurred to them that we would forfeit the goods that they took for granted in our own pursuit of more stuff, more choices, and more convenience. My hypothesis is that if we Unitarian Universalists reverse the order of our principles, we will shift our goals and our focus from more for me to better for all of us. And the intended results and the unintended side effects of our actions will be healthier for all concerned. What would it look like if we were to try to live those Unitarian Universalist principles, starting with the interdependent web rather than with the individual? I hate to say it, but I think it might look like choosing to inconvenience ourselves just a little bit for the good of the larger community. In a sermon I preached one Mother's Day a couple of years ago, I suggested that the willingness to be inconvenienced is probably one of the clearest indicators of parental or familial love. You know, wanting to be the one wakened up in the middle of the night, for instance. Well, this morning I want to suggest that a willingness to be inconvenienced in support of our values becomes a mark of how central those values are in our lives. So, to live from respect for the interdependent web looks like accepting the inconvenience of cutting a door in the back of the house so you don't dump your slops down the neighbor's chimney. It looks like taking the extra time to bike or set up a carpool or take public transit to get to work or to worship. It looks like taking on the extra work of growing a garden and canning your produce, or being part of a CSA or going to the farmer's market. It looks like making a casserole or a salad and coming to the potluck at church rather than eating fast food all by yourself. It looks like turning off the TV and schlepping out into the weather to sing in a chorus or to converse with friends. It looks like walking down along the river and accepting the inconvenience of picking up trash and being rewarded by seeing hawks and roadrunners. It looks like volunteering to help people stay in their homes, and getting to know your neighbors, and taking in the mail when they're away. It looks like voting. It looks like marching. It looks like benefit concerts. It looks like kids learning to slow down and walk where older adults are present, and adults learning to listen through the inconvenient background chatter provided by youth. Your inherent worth and dignity are still important. You don't have to give up imported coffee or chocolate. You don't have to silence your needs or stifle your feelings or turn yourself into a doormat for other people to walk over. That's not what this is about. You do need to be willing to flex a little bit, to go out of your way to act for the good of the group first, trusting that acting for the good of your neighbor will in fact benefit you by and by. As Bill McKibben writes later in the same book, we need to reorient our personal compasses a little bit, shed a certain amount of our hyper-individualism, and replace it with a little bit of neighborliness. We need to think of ourselves as members of a community, and we'll get a better deal. We'll help build a world with some hope of ecological stability, where the chances increase that all of us will be happy. You see, human happiness isn't about more for me. It's about better for all of us. And it springs from that tiny silver coin of neighborliness that rolls out from under the door, which opens to the interdependent web of community. To get there, we need to turn the whole culture upside down. But what better place to start than right here at home with our own UU principles? Blessed be.